This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
All right, that was more of an introduction than I think I've ever had in my entire life. We're going to start talking about why we all start walking the same and why don't we end up that way. All right, so if you see, this is our nice brand new building in Pensacola. This is our health span resilience and performance building in Pensacola, which I have been thankfully recruited from Emory back to the beach to be now in this nice, pretty new building and able to continue my research there. So first, we're going to talk about learning to walk. I'll show you two little clips of both of my sons learning to walk, and probably for all the moms in the room, you'll notice something in common. Dad is in the videos, in all the pictures. Mom is not, because they're always behind the camera. So you'll see that as we have my two little guys start walking, really wide steps, kind of arms up. And we have so that was my older one, Grant. This is my little guy, Chase, as they started to walk. And we tend to think of walking as automatic. We've been doing it for a long time, but it's not an automatic skill. It's really something that we have to learn to do. And in a normal, typically developing child, that skill is learned around 12 months of age. And it's a wide range. It ranges in typical scale from 8 months to 18 months, averaged at 12 months. So if you tend to fall or have children that fall outside that range of 8 months to 18 months, not usually the younger side, but the later side, the pediatrician tends to get a little bit worried, and maybe they might send them to physical therapy or occupational therapy, for example. But once they start to learn to walk, we then have them run, and then we have them in everything we do. So again, we start them really not a lot of motor control. We go from no motor control to being lifting up the head, using arms for support, sitting without support. That sitting without support typically happens about 6 to 8 months in development. And then you get to standing and pulling up on furniture and being able to cruise on the furniture pieces. That usually happens about 8 to 10 months. 12 months is the average for independent walking. So remember, average, everybody walks at 12 months. My older one walked at 14 months. Younger one is always trying to keep up with his brother, so 13 months for him. And then once you get to about 15 to 18 months, a little bit later, a year and a half, it becomes a little bit more stable. The toddlers start to run a little bit, and those patterns become more efficient. So that's where we get into obstacle navigation. So as you see, my little guy is trying to step over a hose. He has to feel the hose with his feet for perception. He sees it. And then he's going to get to the cliff, little step. Has to see the cliff, decides not to do that, turn around, come back, because that was too high. So again, as we learn to walk, that's our perception. So we need to be able to use our senses, our touch, our feel, the visual senses, and that's all encoded in the brain, and that is then translated into automatic walking patterns. And so by the time you get to about 3 to 4 years old, so this is my older son, he was 3.5 in this video, the walking looks more like an adult. We get mature walking patterns when we get to about 3 to 4 years. And he also has a memory of everything. We took him to that light scenario last year. We took him again this year, and he's pointing out where things were the year before at 4 years old. So I don't know where he gets the memory from, but not me. So what do we think of as the engine of walking? So through that, the engine is going to be our calf muscles. Okay, so our calf muscles are the engine of walking. We have 3 big calf muscles and a smaller calf muscle in there. So we have our gastrocnemius. Both heads, we have a lateral head and a medial head. So there's 2 heads to our calf muscles. There's a muscle underneath it called the soleus, and then a little tiny muscle underneath that called the plantaris. And that is really going to be what the basis of walking is and what will help you prevent falling as you get older. So falling as we get older, strength training is very important. If you are going to strength train any muscle, this is the one you want to train, your calf muscles. That's going to help you with falls, fall prevention, obstacle navigation, stepping up and down off curbs, and things such as standing at the sink doing dishes. This motion is going to help train that calf muscle. So things just as simple as calf raises. So the calf is what's going to push you forward every step. And that push off from every step is what keeps walking smooth and efficient. And then we have to think, if the calf muscles are the engine of walking now, what is driving that engine? So we drive the car's in the engine, but what's driving the engine in the body? And that's the brain. So everything's encoded in the brain. Muscles don't fire on their own. We need something to tell them to turn on, to contract, how strongly to contract, and exactly when to turn off in order to get real walking patterns. It's not just strength of the muscle, it's timing, it's coordination, it's motor control. And then all of that control is going to start in the brain. So it really requires every single step we take, it requires the brain to send a signal and travel down the spinal cord into those muscles, including the calf, and those muscles will then fire appropriately. We will also get some sensory feedback, for example, from the ground we're stepping on to make sure if we step in a hole or step on a rock that we can appropriately respond to it. So all of that same time, we're getting motor commands sent to the muscle, we're getting sensory signals sent back to the brain, and the brain is updating that plan at all times from what you see in front of you, from what you feel under your feet, and we need to think about what happens when some of those things are taken away. So we think of typically walking as automatic. We don't think about it, the brain processes it. But as we get older, and if chronic disease enters the picture, then we start to think about walking more. And we have to be more careful because it's no longer automatic. So we start learning to walk, not automatic process. We get older, and maybe chronic disease enters the picture, and we go back to it not being an automatic process. But how did I become interested in motor control in the first place? So we go back to, I started doing triathlons in college, and I noticed that when I got off the bike to run, I felt like I was totally out of place. Sea legs, my legs were not coordinated, didn't know what I was doing, and so that became part of really my first research study. And I ask questions. I am curious. I ask questions, which might be why my little one keeps asking, what is this? My older one keeps asking is, why does that happen? So they're curious too. So I get this all the time. But what I found is we did my first research study, and that's what really sent me down the road into motor control. So I did a study where I had a whole group of participants, bike. They got off the bike, they ran on a treadmill. We had all my fancy biomechanics cameras around them, and you'll see some of those pictures at the end. And your motor control really does change. So your hips go forward from being on the bike, doesn't really change. Your spine super extends, and then in a triathlon, you're asked to run really fast off a bike, uncoordinated. So it feels weird. But if we see the difference in those two lines, our orange group was those with more experience, more than 2 years of experience when doing the sport. Our blue line group was those who had less than 2 years of experience doing the sport. So things like motor patterns can be learned over time. So that's why one takeaway I want you to have is that, yes, we can train those motor patterns, we can train the way we walk, we can train the way we run off a bike, and how that happens is being able to continuously do it. It is not something we want to stop if we get into chronic disease or older age. So I continued down the line of biomechanics and motor control of endurance sport, asked a lot of questions on the sport side, and then we're in Pensacola, so I actually had a really cool study where I went deep sea fishing one time, spent 6 hours on a boat. I got off that boat feeling really sea-legged, and then took my undergraduate students out to the boats in the summers, had them put force plates on the floor, measure people's balance before they got on the boat, measure the sober people's balance when they got back off the boat, and actually see what happened when they went on a fishing excursion. So that was actually some really cool things we got to do in terms of how the brain controls balance, how the brain controls motor control. And it was really good until I had kind of a light bulb moment when I was talking to my husband. So my husband did his medical residency at UPMC, so University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And he was in his first year of residency and probably the first 3 months of residency. And what he was doing, he's a foot and ankle surgeon, is 10 or more of these amputations a week. So that's a transmetatarsal amputation. And this is typical outcomes for diabetic ulcers. So those people that get diabetic ulcers often become infected, and those infections lead to amputations. And he was in a space where this is actually a very nicely healed one, looks as best as it can get, but he was in a space where he's probably doing at least 10 to 12 of these a week. And I asked him, what do you do with these people? You cut off half their foot. What do you do with them? And the standard of care is to stitch them up, send them home, see if the wound healed. It was not send them to rehab, reteach them to walk again because they just lost half a foot. And that one 30-second conversation was really what transitioned my line from I'm going to focus on sports to I want to focus on actually helping people that need it the most. Was all from that 30 seconds. Again, he was only 3 months into medical residency at the time and doing at least 10 of these a week. So now I wanted to transition my research line and looking at mobility impairments in older adults, because guess what? Every single one of us, we have in common, we get older, we all age. That's gonna happen to everybody in this room. So mobility impairments among older adults, we see that as individuals start to get older, the percentage of walking or inability to walk is interfering with their daily activities a lot more. So those first numbers are actually from a 2011 estimate paper. I couldn't find any updated ones, but at ages 65 to 70 or 74, about 20% to 30%. At 84, that impairs activities of daily living. So showering oneself, bathing, being able to feed oneself. Those are the types of daily living activities it was interfering with. And then gait disorders, as you get to 80 years and above, is more than 60% of the population has some type of walking or gait disorder. And we'll see that walking changes as we get older, no matter what, even in healthy adults. But if you compound some gait disorders or other chronic diseases on top of that, then it's going to kind of mess some of those issues up a little bit more. And the other issue we have is physical inactivity. So older adults in general, even my undergraduate college students right now, are inactive. They sit on a couch. And about 30% of people, just in general, are inactive if they're 50 and older. And that inactivity goes up at least another 30% if somebody has a chronic disease. So diabetes, or they have cardiovascular disease, or hypertension. So that physical inactivity combined with some of these changes we'll see in the actual muscle architecture, motor patterns, is going to lead to what I call a negative cycle of disability. So that way, if somebody stops moving, they lose the ability to keep moving. So we'll see. But if you're moving and you're walking, how many steps a day do we need? Does anybody have a 10,000? 10,000? 7,000. 7,000 is actually what we typically have seen in the literature. We hear 10,000 steps a lot because 10,000 is a nice round number. Okay, that actually did not come out of any scientific literature, but the 7,000 steps per day number now actually has come out of scientific literature. So if we can orient you to the graph, that black line on every single one of those graphs is a reference mark. That is our 2,000 steps per day mark. And as you look along the graph, and we get to a point where we're 5,000 to 7,000 steps, we'll see that we have kind of a plateau of some of these mortality, morbidity inflection points. So 7,000 steps per day compared to 2,000 steps per day is going to be associated with, we put some of those numbers in there, so 47% lower risk of all-cause mortality, 25% of cardiovascular disease incidence, 47% cardiovascular disease mortality, 37% lower risk of cancer mortality, 14% lower risk of diabetes, 38% lower risk of dementia, 22% lower risk of depressive symptoms, 28% lower risk of falls. So if we can add in 5,000 steps per day from those 2,000 steps to 7,000 steps, your incidence or propensity risk factors for getting a lot of these chronic diseases significantly go down. And these are clinically meaningful outcomes. There are clinically meaningful improvements in those health outcomes. And that 10,000 number that everybody hears, we've now dropped that down to a more realistic target because we see a plateau. And it might be now more achievable that you know it. And the good thing is our phones now all have step counters in them. Our watches all now have step counters in them. So it's usually something that is readily able to be tracked just by something that you have in your pocket already. And now we get back to how that walking changes, even if we're walking those 7,000 steps with age and healthy adults. So a big part of this, if we look, is going to be our calf muscles again. So this diagram, and this came from a good colleague of mine who's at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and all he studies is the calf muscles and aging and walking. So very smart gentleman, and has built an entire career off of what happens with the calf muscles, because that is your engine. So we have slower walking speeds. We tend to have shorter steps, higher energy cost, and what I focus on in terms of my chronic disease population and in terms of my interventions is this reduced push-off. So as we're walking and we try to push off the ground, it's this backward motion with that back foot that propels you to the next step that we lose from both motor control standpoint and from the calf muscle standpoint. But we all know it's not just the calf, it's multiple systems that decline together. So we see decreases in muscle strength with aging, sensation decreases, reaction time slows, and balance systems become less responsive. So I tend to think of an analogy. I think of walking as the canary in the coal mine for overall function. So the canary in the coal mine was something that the coal miners brought down because the birds were more sensitive to the dangerous gases in the coal mine. So if something bad was going to happen before the coal miners could actually sense it themselves, and the canary showed distress, that's really what let everybody, kind of gave them a warning sign and got them out. So that was that the environment was unsafe, the canary showed distress. That same type of biomarker is a gait change in an adult. So as soon as you start to see walking changes, such as coordination changes, slowing of the gait, that's kind of your first signal that something else might be wrong. So we see walking requires strength, sensation, coordination, vision, balance, brain processing all at once. So if your walking changes, one of those things might be affected. So it is a clinical biomarker. I see it as kind of the canary. If that thing changes, that walking shows distress, we might have somewhere else in there that really is a change in another system that is now showing up as walking. And then walking speed. So walking speed is very important as we age. If we notice the graph, I actually picked the graph for women instead of the graph for men because it's a much larger variability for all-cause kind of median survival. because we know that walking speed for women is also associated with things like more so with osteoarthritis. So the curve for men looked exactly the same. It was just actually a little tighter together. But I picked the women's curve because we see that the faster somebody walks, so that's the top of the graph there, the more survivability they have as they age. And as we start to slow down in that gray section, that's when we start to see people losing independence. So our goal, we truly do see, is we want people walking at 0.8 meters per second. And that is overground walking speed. And that's kind of our boundary. Sometimes we see is, are they more prone to needing help, or are they able to be independent living? So that 0.8 walking speed is a good speed we see, and we can stratify people. If somebody has a chronic disease, sometimes that moves down to a 0.6. But for example, we have another study going on in our Pensacola location that we cannot even take somebody in the study unless they walk at 0.8 meters per second as a healthy adult subject. And then what we also see happens is when we're learning to walk and when we're a healthy younger adult, we use our ankles. And we use our ankles to push off. We use our ankles for balance control. So if you were to step over an obstacle or you have a slip, your ankle is going to be that first thing that fires. Those muscles around the ankle fires, calf's really important. As we age, we then tend to shift from our ankles up to kind of a hip balance strategy. So we're using more of our back muscles, our abdominal muscles, our quadriceps, and our hamstrings to balance gait, to make gait move forward, and also to catch you from falls. So that whole strategy shifts. And this is, again, by another very smart colleague I had at Emory University, smarter than I am. But this has been shown that over and over again, as we age, we shift from ankles in walking strategy, balance control strategy, to our hips. And that distal to power redistribution strategy means we have less power at the hip to continue walking. So when the ankle produces less power, the body then compensates by shifting that power generation upward into the hip muscles, but the hip muscles are less energy efficient. That means we have a higher metabolic cost. It is a higher cost of transport. We have to, walking, it feels more effortful. We have to take in more oxygen to walk the same speed we were walking before. And unfortunately, in a lot of settings, it also can potentially make you more prone to falling, which is something we always want to avoid. So we have, that's all healthy aging. That's going to happen to every single person in that room, but when disease enters the picture, it's going to further disrupt those motor patterns. So compensation is going to replace efficiency. So our energy expenditure is going to go up, and we're going to compensate with other muscles. We're going to probably use our trunk a lot more, and it also puts you in a higher risk of falls, injury, and loss of independence. And what I really want to try to do is to put a pin in this somewhere so that we can keep people independent and also keep the quality of life improved. Because if people stop walking, they can't go to their church, they can't go to social life, they're not going to the grocery store, and that's when quality of life decreases as well with that loss of independence. So stroke is the leading cause of a long-term adult disability. Post-stroke hemiparesis, it's a chronic problem where you would have a brain lesion from the stroke, and it can be either an ischemic, so that means a blood clot lesion, or hemorrhagic lesion, which means we had a bleed on one side of the brain. More commonly in adults, we see that blood clot region. And what happens is we see a paralysis on one side of the body, most commonly affecting the leg, the knee, the foot, and then sometimes we actually see it in the arm as well. So we have a paralysis on one side of the body, and that can last for decades. It is likely a lifelong impairment that somebody has with the post-stroke hemiparesis. So the first thing we know, if they're kind of paralyzed or semi-paralyzed on one side of the body, they're not going to be able to use that foot to push off the ground. And then they're going to have decreased gait speed because they can't use both feet to push off the ground equally, and then interlimb asymmetry. So again, one leg is not going to be working the same as the others. So what we've developed is gait interventions. Treadmill training, just at increased speeds, has been shown to significantly improve stroke outcomes. So if all you have is no fancy equipment, but you have a treadmill and somebody there to make sure you're safe on a treadmill, that's very important. Being able to walk at just an increased speed rather than your overground walking has been shown to help our post-stroke outcomes. And then as we get into some of our more fancy laboratory techniques we see right now, we have functional electrical stimulation and then real-time gait biofeedback. So this is a video of our functional electrical stimulation. This individual she has a right brain lesion, which means her left leg is affected. So the brain side and the side of the affected body are going to be opposite. And underneath this blue sensor is electrodes. And those electrodes are stimulating her muscles as she goes through the gait cycle to have her stimulates the calf muscles to push off the ground, and then it's going to stimulate the muscles on the front of the shin to pick her foot up so she can take the next step. So if she did not, and this is with the functional electrical stimulation on, and this is with it working. But if you were to see her walk without it working, she tends to have a foot drop, and then she's not able to push off the ground. And what we can also do is, this is biofeedback. So here, we have no sensors. We are asking the person to change their gait themselves or to change the way they walk themselves. So there's no electrical stimulation. What it's doing is it's measuring the force under their foot on the treadmill and then showing them that force on the screen and asking them, can you hit this target? If I give you a target that's more push-off than you typically walk with. So here you can see them every time they hit that target, you hear a beep, and they see the slider move over. So even if there's a nerve injury here, there's a central nervous system injury, the brain is injured, but we're still able to ask the person to create those motor patterns because the brain is very efficient at creating new motor maps and then sending it to the muscles to still be able to effectively change their gait. So even without putting electrical stimulation on someone, we can ask somebody to consciously think about changing their gait pattern, even if they have a brain injury, and it will actually work to help change their gait pattern. So this is a study that is actually being wrapped up at Emory University right now. They just finished their 5th year of this clinical trial, and we have seen very good outcomes with the biofeedback. On this clinical trial, we've seen very good outcomes with the electrical stimulation. So our next steps are, we want to take this out of the lab. Can we put this on a sleeve for somebody walking around the community? Can we use sensors and move from there? So looking at those graphs, we do see that we of course have to have a control group. So we had an able-bodied group, and then we had our stroke group here. And we'll see that the first line is going to be before we had any biofeedback. The second line is with that biofeedback. This first graph is that actual measure of propulsion. So just by showing them the visual screen in front of them and hearing a beep, they're able to change their propulsion. We're also going to see changes in the stiffness of the ankle as they walk, so they're able to get a better modulation out of that propulsion. And that last graph is what we call plantar flexor moment, which means they're now more forcefully generating that propulsion. And then I said I want to take this out of lab. Our next step of taking this out of the lab and having somebody censored up and hours in the lab is to be able to give them sensors or insoles or something you can take out into the community, walk around the neighborhood with. So what we did is we have insoles in this person's shoes, and that beeping is now coming from the insole. And now this is on that person's phone. So it shows them an application on the phone. They can hear the beep either through a speaker or through a headphone, and that gives us promise. We've validated these, that we can now take our laboratory technologies out, put an insole that's 3 millimeters thick in someone's shoe, and send them out to walk around the block to be able to achieve some of the same goals that we had in the laboratory. So again, we're seeing those same improvements in propulsion we saw in the laboratory, and we also now did this in a group of individuals with diabetic neuropathy, which I will get to. So my road to independence as an investigator, we started in sport. I worked with a lot of stroke patients, but I always kept coming back to that question of what do I do with somebody with a transmetatarsal amputation or has lost a foot due to diabetic complications. And as a scientist, you also need to be able to distinguish yourself from your mentors. So I've taken everything I've learned, all the techniques we've gone through, and taken those propulsion techniques, because we see the same things with other chronic diseases, and applied them to my group of patients with diabetic neuropathy, because that 30-second conversation never left my head. But if we go back, you notice that this is not a straight road. This is a very winding road. So my way to get here was definitely not a straight path. It took me a long time to figure out the next steps and where to go from there. So diabetic peripheral neuropathy is going to be the most common complication of diabetes. There are 40 million Americans, which is 12% of the adult population, that have diabetes, and half of those will have diabetic neuropathy. So diabetic neuropathy means they lose sensation at the bottom of their foot, and then you're not getting that same feedback from the foot all the way up to the brain that you would if you had sensation under their feet. So a lot of people would typically think of this: if I step on a tack, then I can't feel the tack on my foot, and then I get a wound. That's an extreme version. I actually had somebody in the lab this week where I probably could stick a knife in the bottom of his foot and wouldn't be able to feel anything because it was that severe. However, what we see in the more mild cases, and what we want to try to especially treat, is I'm losing sensation, so I need to press harder on the bottom of the foot for my brain to still get that same feedback I was getting when I had the same sensation. And because of this neuropathy, it also is a significant impact in our healthcare costs and our healthcare system. So Medicare and Medicaid would rather us take care of those problems before they happen rather than the complications afterwards, for sure. So the graph on the side shows us, I actually did this study with my husband when he was still in residency, but frequency of complications after somebody would have a toe amputation. So a toe amputation, not as severe as the transmetatarsal amputations you've seen, but if somebody had diabetic neuropathy, they are typically 100 times more likely to get another toe amputation than somebody without them. I mean, it is significantly more. So if they didn't have the diabetes, if they didn't have the neuropathy and had a toe amputation, maybe because of an injury or hypothermia, those people with diabetes are like about 90-something% more likely to get a subsequent one rather than somebody with the injury. So, and as they get those, and it depends on where those amputations stops, the 5-year mortality increases and gets significantly worse as well. And then the quality of life of those individuals, they have increased pain and discomfort, they have problems with mobility and activities of daily living. Reduced quality of life is something that I want to try to help. So those walking impairments really are, we see that same reduction in walking speed, we see that reduction in functional ambulation, we see that reduced step counts, but scientifically what I can look at is that reduced propulsion we've been talking about, but there's a double-edged sword here of plantar pressure, and that's due to the neuropathy. So if you can't feel the bottom of your foot, you have to put more pressure on the bottom of your foot to try to get the brain to say, I feel the ground. And because of that increased plantar pressure, I am now at more risk for injuring the bottom of my foot, creating an ulcer that will not heal, and then that progressing into amputation. However, I'm also not as functional. So I want to be able to push off the ground more to take the next step. So this now creates an inherent double-edged sword where I need to push off the ground more to be able to take the next step, but I don't want to push off the ground too much where I injure the bottom of my foot because I can't feel it. And then looking at those step counts and activity levels, those individuals with the diabetic neuropathy significantly take less steps than those even with diabetes and without neuropathy or just control groups. For this group of individuals, we have seen that classically, physicians have said, don't walk, stay off your feet. And that's not great advice. So that was the classic recommendation because they were worried about ulcer risk and re-ulceration because of those plantar pressure increases. However, we know there is tissue stress theories like we see muscle stress theories. So if you go to a gym and work out, the goal is to hypertrophy your muscles. Your muscles will get bigger if you continuously go to the gym, continuously strength train, they get stronger, they get bigger. That's the same idea with the tissue on the bottom of your foot. If you slowly add stress to the tissue on the bottom of the foot, it will adapt, it will get stronger, and then you can walk for longer periods of time. Same concept as you would to train your muscles in the gym by strength training. So the current ADA, or American Diabetes Association guidelines, tell us that they encourage weight-bearing activities in those with diabetic neuropathy. So this is how I have now taken the work we've done in stroke, the encouragement we see, and the guidelines have really shifted to take that and see what we can do with training somebody with the diabetic neuropathy, with the biofeedback, to now improve their propulsion, but I'm still measuring. If we go back to that heat map graph, I am measuring their plantar pressures at the same time, so I know if they're getting into a zone that's going to put them at injury risk. So if we look at this graph is what we see, this is what I see from coming out of my treadmill system. So this first graph is what we actually see as the measure of propulsion. And this peak here is what we actually term our propulsion number. So peak propulsion is where that is where that number comes from on the graph. So that first graph is a healthy individual. That red line is where I'm getting peak propulsion out of. These next two graphs, if you look at them, they're going to look very different. These are two individuals with neuropathy, and granted, this is mild diabetic neuropathy. This is not moderate, this is not severe. The two graphs represent two different individuals with mild neuropathy, and you look at the middle graph, and you can see the middle graph might still get to similar peak propulsion, but the way they get there is much different. The shape is much different. So the way they get to that peak propulsion is much different. And then our third person, the third graph, really doesn't have much of a propulsive aspect at all. And again, these are people with mild neuropathy. When we clinically grade them, they are actually on the very low end of the scale, unlike my gentleman who I had in the lab the other day who can't feel anything under his feet. So it's something that we see early, and as we talked about the canary and the gold mine, it's something we see early, we see these changes early, and we want to try to change them right away. So this is our setup in our IHMC lab in Pensacola, and I have a very similar setup to what we had at Emory University too. This is a sample of me on the treadmill doing the same protocol I asked my participants to do. And unfortunately, I could not find the videos. I only had pictures of this one. But I asked them to walk on the treadmill, and if you see the screen in front of them, you see that there is a blue bar in front of them, and then every time we take a step, that blue bar will beep, and it'll hit a target line if they're able to generate enough propulsion on that foot to hit the target we asked them to. And at the same time, I'm monitoring on a different computer the plantar pressures under their feet to see, are they putting those pressures at an increased risk for injury then? And then I also make sure that temperature increases at the bottom of the foot are also a risk factor for injury. So I measure their feet in temperature-wise beforehand and at every rest break during their testing session to see, are we ever going to be at a point where I am going to make somebody unsafe? And my goal is to never make somebody unsafe, but see if we can change the science to go from there. So the common thread of all of this is really a loss of motor control. So both aging and disease are going to share some of the same patterns, but some of those changes might be exacerbated if we have chronic disease. Walking as we age and with chronic disease becomes less automatic. We need to think of it a little more, and that compensation replaces coordination. So we need to think about those steps a little more. If I have even just a toe injury or I stub my toe, my walking's going to be different than if I had healthy, normal feet. So if I hit my toe on the corner of a door, I'm a klutz. I do this all the time. I am walking different than if I would normally be walking, so that compensation is going to come into play. But what we do know is walking is trainable. So even with brain injuries, even if you can't feel the bottom of the feet, we know the nervous system is adaptable, motor patterns can be trained, and early intervention is what really matters the most. So my scientific goal is to take all those technologies that we are really having proof of concept in a lab and take them out of the lab, move them into the general public so that everybody has access to them. Can I use sensors? Can I use insoles? Can I use sleeves that are commercially available or you can get from your doctor's office or physical therapist's office to then train some of these things if individuals have a disease that warrants it. And then for those who are healthy aging, stand at the kitchen sink and do your calf raises and make sure the calf is strong moving forward. So really, we all start walking the same, but why don't we end that way? So walking does reflect health. All those small changes we make as we age really add up, and protecting walking is going to protect your independence. So anything you can do to maintain walking health, that's what you can do to maintain healthy lifestyles moving forward. And so I would like to thank, of course, my KO1 team, and that's the big grant I have by the National Institutes of Health right now and the other investigators on there. I have two great interns, Kevin and Jamie, that are with me day in, day out, that I wouldn't be able to do anything with. And then my funding sponsors as well, and IHMC as well. So, thank you.
I'm sure there are quite a few questions. We have a little extra time for Q&A tonight. So, here we go.
Excellent talk, Dr. Rendos. My question for you is, in a non-diabetic, what's your opinion regarding weighted vests walking?
Oh, I love putting any kind of extra stress on the body if you're healthy and able to do it, because it's going to train those muscles to be more functional at a later time. So anything you do to move that curve up into better function will keep you healthier in the long run.
Great talk. We enjoyed that. I've had some trouble with my feet, and so if I'm trying to replace electrolytes, how do you get that does that without having sugary type electrolytes? Are there things that'll work?
So I believe there's a couple of new electrolytes on the market, but things like Element, I think it's called LMNT, is a non-sugar based electrolyte that you can mix into your drink.
Okay.
And then also other supplements. So you got to think of not just things you drink, but electrolytes are sodium, magnesium, things that you might be able to take at night, for example, to help you sleep. Like a magnesium pill really helps with, cardiovascular recovery, and it's also an electrolyte. So thinking of putting in some of those things as well.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I see all you guys. I'm going to go on this row, though. I'm coming up this aisle. Yep.
Nicole, thank you. Your talk is unbelievable, related to all of us. I have a special appreciation. My dad was one of those people, a well-managed type 2 diabetic. He didn't eat ice cream and then shoot up insulin. We now know an awful lot about low carbohydrate diets. I'm a trained health coach. But he had the first amputation, and then he had the next amputation of the toe. And then within 5 years, at 92, they were offering the foot amputation, and he said, I'm finished.
Yes.
I have lived too long, and off to. So it really, I so appreciate your telling the story, and I just hope that in my lifetime and yours, we're working with interdisciplinary teams upstream, because I know that's probably your ultimate goal, knowing
Yes.
it's all upstream so that your work is less and less, and you might be working yourself out of a job, but the research is phenomenal.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the goal. I have a big medical team actually at Emory Grady Hospital that I had a meeting with the other day. That is, there's one endocrinologist on the team, there's an infectious disease specialist on the team, there is, and then a podiatrist on that team that works at the Grady Diabetes Center, that we're trying to start from that side and work down, especially because they're low income to no income health system. So hopefully help with that too.
Insert available for purchase?
So the insoles that I am currently using for the biofeedback, they are available for purchase. They are expensive. So what we typically see is like a physical therapy clinic would purchase them, and then they'd send them out to their patients. And the goal is, because I'm not an engineer, I'm a human subjects person, but I work with a whole bunch of really fancy engineers that know everything I don't know to do in terms of building systems. So our next goal is to try to build some of these systems, for example, in-house, and get them out there. But the system I do use in terms of the insoles right now is the Novell Load Sole insoles, and a lot of sports programs have them for athletics, and we're starting to see them more and more in PT type situations. And it's a free application you can download on your phone. It's just the insoles are fairly expensive. So we're seeing them more in like high school settings, athletic training settings, PT clinics, and try to get them out into the community that way.
Have you tried mirror therapy for those metatarsal amputations?
For like the feedback pain, or for the phantom pain? We have, but we're still seeing some of the, so I'm a person that I do the research on the person and I can't let them go. I'm also an athletic trainer, and I bring them back to try to help them when they don't have availability to help them in other settings. So I might go above and beyond the research setting.
Because I'm a hand therapist, and I use it some when I need it, and it works pretty good with amputations and like increased hypersensitivity. So I was wondering if you guys use it too.
I personally have used it when I broke my hand in 8 places in a bike crash one time, and after those surgeries to get my hands to work again. But I have worked with about 2 of my patients right now that just needed some extra help with that too.
Thank you.
What do you think about plyometrics and distance running for old people who are aging fairly well?
I think it's great. So I would actually say that plyometric strength training is going to be number 1. My goal is to still be doing triathlons as we get later in life and endurance running, but you still need the muscle mass to do it. So I want to make sure that if you're doing the endurance running is great, but you still need the muscle mass to do it. And I guarantee you, every person who's a runner in the room, that's the first thing they leave out of their program, because they want to continue to run because they get runner's high. So the strength training is super important, and as long as you're doing it safely without injury, I'd keep doing it until the day you can't. So.
Thank you. Have you had any work with prosthetics on these partial amputees of the foot?
We're putting in a new grant application right now to do that. So, yes, to look at carbon insoles that wrap over the prosthetic part, because they also lose. So with standard of care, most of these patients come in with just cotton balls shoved in the front of their shoes or a silicone filler. And so it's really just a filler for the front of the shoes without function that we're typically seeing. So being able to get them insole development or that they can actually walk more appropriately again is a goal that we have in writing right now.
Do you suppose or have been able to study that would improve them having further amputation, that you're getting that far along in your studies?
That is a goal. That is not somewhere we're there yet, but I mean, that's really a goal, is to really hopefully stop that 5-year mortality risk that we're seeing. Because I really do care about these patients, and my grandfather was one of them who lost a toe at some point too before he passed away. So,
yeah. Hi, Nicole. Walking, you say you need to walk 5,000 to 7,000 steps every day, and I find walking kind of boring. Is there anything you can substitute for that, like raising a treadmill up to a higher degree level, or
anything you can? So that is I would say your bare minimum is 5,000 to 7,000 steps per day. Anything you can do above that is going to be above and beyond better than you can do. If you're on a treadmill, if you raise the treadmill to 1 degree instead of 0 degrees, that's actually equivalent to overground walking. So those people who are constantly walking on a treadmill instead of overground, just raise that treadmill 1 degree, and that's going to give you the closest thing to overground walking. But yeah, anything you can do to supplement your bare minimum of keeping lifestyle is going to be better.
Hi, Nicole. I was wondering, has there been any studies to show any correlation between a child having braces and assistant devices when they're younger compared to an adult having difficulties as they grow older?
I don't know personally if we looked at like the both cohorts, but yes, if we look at, my colleague Zach, who did the evening lecture at Pensacola last month, he's 41 years old and he has polio. He had polio when he was a child. So he's got no muscle mass in his left leg, and he walks with a brace. And he walked with a brace throughout his entire childhood. And he's okay. He brought this up in our last lecture, so this is a story that we're able to share. But he's walked with a brace since his childhood. Probably he's had a dozen surgeries, and is now in his early 40s, where there's a propensity, like a potential for him to have increased what we call neuronal fatigue. So the nerves will just quit working even more in 30s and 40s with post-polio syndrome. So I don't know specifically of studies that have kind of followed people from children all the way to adults, because we think of children like idiopathic toe walkers, and they have contracted calves, and then they put them in braces to follow those out, and as they get older, the problem is that's a long time to research somebody, and people don't want to give us money to do it. So we usually see groups rather than people being followed, and it's harder to make direct comparisons when it's not the exact same people that we had at the beginning. Because if you can think about it, that's a 60-year study if they had braces when they were a kid and then go there. But anecdotal evidence-wise, for example, we talk to Zach all the time. Zach brought this up in his last lecture, that he's now experiencing, he had a whole bunch of surgeries when he was a kid and is now experiencing more effects from that. And he likes to hike, he likes to mountaineer, and he can go up mountains fine, but it takes him 5 to 6 times longer to go down a mountain than any of his friends that he hikes with.
Thank you so much for your lecture tonight. And are you including any subjects with Parkinson's, or do you know anybody who's doing this kind of research with these adaptive devices for people with Parkinson's? I
personally am not, but we have a study that should be funded in the next couple of weeks at IHMC with Dr. Marcus Baumann for Parkinson's, that I believe is a tie-in with Northeastern University as well. So that's coming in through the doors.
2 practical questions. I'm dealing with a wife with Alzheimer's who was a faithful walker, who now just walks with a little slow stumbling gait, loses her balance. Should I encourage her to use one of the walkers? Will that help her or hurt her? Then the next question is for me, tell us about running or walking shoes, your opinion on good ones. Do they last longer than the advertisers tell us they do? How do we know?
So your first question, I would say, yes, a rollator is the walker with the wheels is a great tool to keep people mobile. And especially the ones with the seat that you can turn around on, sit and take breaks, great tool to keep people mobile. My grandmother herself refused to use one for probably about 8 to 10 years. And we finally convinced her to use one. She's like, why didn't I do this 8 years ago? And then the second question is, for running walking shoes, is really finding one that fits you personally. Every walking shoe is different. I'm a runner, and I track the mileage on my shoes, and I have a history of stress fractures, so I won't let my running shoes go past 250 miles because I track the mileage on my shoes. But again, shoes are individualized, and everybody has a different foot structure. Somebody with diabetes might need a more structured shoe that's more cushioned. Runner that wants to go fast might need something that is a little bit more lightweight. They need different training shoes. So again, it's finding one that fits your feet, but also not forgetting to replace them when they need replacing, because foam wears out, foam retires. And that's where I tend to see people get in more trouble, is they had great shoes to begin with, they've worn them a little too long.
About 15 years ago, I had arthroscopic surgery on my right knee at the advice of my physician. The problem I was having was that something was wrong with the cartilage in that, but I couldn't tell what it was. So, of course, the arthroscopic surgeon cut it out, and I no longer had that piece of cartilage. Now, 15 years later, my right knee is wobbly. When I first get up, the knee tends to go like this. And if I'm walking in a rough area, it's sometimes difficult to manage. Although when I get going and my muscles are beginning to take up some of the slack, that problem evens out. Now, my question then really is this something that should have ever been done in the first place? Is this something that can be fixed by any of the methods you're using? And if so, what should I look for in the way of recovery?
So I would assume, since your physician said this is a good idea, yes, it was probably a good idea to take out torn cartilage and tissue in your knee. But that means you have also had 15 years of it not being there and not providing a cushion for your knee. So my suggestion would be really to, physical therapy-wise, train the muscles around it. So you want to be able to do some exercises like squats or lunges safely to train all those muscles around the knee to keep it stable. Because physical therapy exercise, functional exercise, you can't get back the tissue you lost, but those muscles around it are going to keep it stable. And then you also said it feels better as it warms up, but if you get it to fire more quickly by training them, then you'll have less of that warming up period. So I say physical therapy is a great tool for almost everything, and it just depends on the specific injury and the specific exercises you're using.
Nicole, in terms of use of insoles, do you tend to recommend against the use of gel insoles or soft insoles in people with diabetic neuropathy if you can avoid it?
Again, I think it depends on the person and or if they've had a history of an ulceration already. So if they've had an ulcer and the ulcer's healed, we do they a lot of times give them custom insoles where we offload the insole, but everybody's got a different foot. So what might work for one person might not work for another. Oh.
Okay. What is your opinion about the theory of grounding, where you connect barefoot to the earth, and how it's supposed to help your balance and also your entire physical metabolism?
I don't know much about grounding, but I do know that barefoot exercises are important. So being able to stand barefoot, and we have little tiny muscles in your foot called intrinsic foot muscles that don't actually cross the ankle joint. So especially for those people who have lost some of that, I guess, flexibility of their foot and their strength of their foot, I have them do things like picking up marbles with their toes and towel crunches with the toes too to help with that. And some, like you mentioned, grounding, standing barefoot on the ground, you're gonna have an uneven surface. The toes are going to probably do the same thing. They're gonna start to grip the ground. I think it's a great tool for keeping foot strength, keeping ankle strength. I don't actually have any background on the grounding of that, so.
Due to previous injuries and bilateral calcaneus fractures, I'm not able to really be on the treadmill.
Yes.
However, what I have found is if I ride my bicycle,
Yes.
and I'm up there going like 10 miles 3 times a week, that strengthens pretty much all my muscles in my lower part of my body. And that's helped tremendously. Is there any other, is that, my first question, I guess, is does that strengthen my calves to the extent?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Do you have cages on your bike, like to put your toes in, or is it just a
No,
flat pedal?
I just have it flat, but I can position my foot to where I want.
So to get your calves more, if you just want to put the top of it on where you could stick your shoe in so you could pull up on the pedal,
Right.
That's also going to strengthen your calves. But biking is a great activity when you're unable to walk, for strengthening, for muscle strengthening, because you're still weight bearing. I know a lot of people love to swim, and swimming is a great exercise cardiovascular wise, but you're not weight bearing, so you're not actually applying stress to the bones to actually get the calcium in the bones, and then we get things like osteoporosis. So this is why swimmers always do dry land activities now, because we know a little bit better. But I think biking is a great alternative because it's still weight bearing on the pedals to walking for that too. But my one suggestion would be maybe getting the little toe covers to go over the tops of the pedals so you can pull up on the pedal too. And then you get the back of your leg and you get the calves.
How do the muscles in the thigh complement the muscle movement in the calves?
So the whole body's a chain, and you have myofascial sling systems. And all of your muscles are essentially connected by a big layer of fascia. So, and all of your muscles are interconnected by nerves. So if your calves are weak, then your quads and your hamstrings are going to have to compensate, and vice versa. But when you actually use it, the brain's got to send a signal somewhere, and it all sends a signal down one big neural pathway to the muscles. And they all have to work in coordination. So I do think your calves are the most important muscle in terms of just stability. They're a slow twitch muscle. That's what you use typically just to stand here. But nothing works in silo. Everything works together. And when one thing's not working correctly, the other thing's not working correctly because it's compensating for it.
Excuse me, I have a question. Are you familiar with vibration plates, like the waiver vibration? Does that increase your circulation?
I have not used it for circulation. We used it for a chronic ankle instability study, and it helped with the balance training for that. I have not actually used it for circulation, though, so I couldn't answer that question. I'm sorry.
Okay, last but certainly not least. Here.
Anything special for people with scoliosis?
That, unfortunately, I'm not terribly familiar with scoliosis, but I do know that it varies in severity and it's very individual dependent. So the exercises from somebody with scoliosis, because again, it's going to vary so much from person to person to person, it looks so different, might be the best advice would be going to a physical therapist or an occupational therapist and seeing what exercises somebody can do safely and keeps them mobile. Because we also don't want to lose the flexibility component of that, especially with your hip joints with scoliosis being not in the correct positions. But I would definitely, with scoliosis, go seek out somebody who can evaluate that because everybody's different, person to person.
Nicole, thank you so much for an amazing lecture.